All right. Welcome to the DDPS seminar, everyone. Before we introduce our invited speakers, let's go over some rules and logistics. Not many. First, please mute yourself during the talk, but if you have questions, you can unmute and ask questions or use chat room to post your questions so that we can address them in Q&A session at the end. Second, today's DDPS seminar is open to external audience. Please no classified discussions. And today's the talk is going to be recorded and available in YouTube channel in near future. Okay, that's about it. Now let me introduce our speaker today. It is an honor to host Professor David Bortz, who earned his PhD in 2002 with H.T. Banks at North Carolina State University. He was a postdoc at the University of Michigan in mathematics and joined the faculty in applied math at the University of Colorado in 2006. The core of his research interests are weak form-based scientific machine learning and inverse problems at the intersection of applied math and statistics. His research has been supported by NSF, NIH, DOE, and DOD. Today, David will talk about a first principles approach to understand. Sorry, not that. He's going to talk about the weak form is stronger than you think. All right. Now let me pass the baton to him. But before that, let me ask a somewhat informal questions to get to know him better. My first question to David today will be, how have you ended up where you are right now in terms of career, research, and work, etc.?
Well, thank you very much for the nice introduction, Young Soo. In answer to that question, it's been a bit of a meander, so to speak. I started out doing inverse problems as an undergrad. I went to do optimization and computational fluid dynamics, and then I kept trying to figure out what I really wanted to do in terms of, I knew I wanted to do applied math, and eventually I ended up doing mathematical biology because it seemed like the questions were very messy and interesting, that could benefit a great deal from bringing more mathematics and applied math computational methods to bear. And so I went through the standard career path, got tenure, and about the time I got tenure, I started looking back to see what had frustrated me, what had just inhibited progress. And the thing that struck me was in biology in particular, when you would create models, which model was the correct model, just parameter fitting, forward solver based, you basically guess a parameter, forward solve, iterate your least squares function. And so I just kind of got to thinking, let's try to think more about the computational methods and the mathematics behind like the nature of model selection, as well as system identification. And so eventually ended up working on this weak form approach, is where this got. It basically came out of being frustrated of trying to fit parameters to another biochemistry or bacteria model and them not working. And this particular method that we have come up with, and this approach that we have come up with, has a surprising number of applications in many different areas, and has really helped answer some important questions that have in system identification. They've sort of been elusive for a while, and so it actually has applications that are much broader than biology. As this is why Young Soo, we've been talking, is they seem to be relevant in computational plasma physics and such, and reduced order modeling there. So
Nice, nice. I mean, your frustrations led you to a wonderful world. It sounds like.
it's worked out pretty well, yeah.
Nice, nice story. Okay, well, the stage is yours.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, thank you again for the invitation here. So what I'm going to talk about today is an area of applied math, computational methods, that has really, it was something that was a part of the initial flowering of scientific computation and scientific computing that began in the 50s. Specifically, where some of this comes from was the aerospace engineering literature, where they were, of course, trying to identify parameters very fast for the new at the time, of course, the jets that were being created. And so what happened was there was a strategy for parameter estimation that was proposed and eventually discarded. And the reason it was discarded is fascinating. And there's actually some interesting parallels to what's going on today, in the sense that where a lot of system identification went was the direction of, let's try to solve the differential equation or the stochastic differential equation in some way, and then we can compare with data and use that process to estimate parameters. This is sort of a, there's a positive feedback loop here, where you need a bigger computer, you need to come up with more algorithms, there are perhaps more knobs to turn and more tweaks to make to get all of these pieces to fit together. But then, of course, you would like a bigger computer so that you can do more of these computations. There's actually a very, I was realizing the other day, there's actually a very strong similarity to the way that some of the neural network literature has gone, in terms of there's more knobs, you need a bigger computer, et cetera. And so what we're doing here is we're going back to the basics of stuff that was developed in the 50s and 60s on system identification, with the benefit of 70 years of numerical methods, computational methods, advances in statistics, as well as parallel programming methods. All of these seem to come together in a way that wasn't available back when these methods they were originally created. And I'll get going in just a second, but it's just the overview of the core of what's happening here is based upon the weak form. So we've all heard about the finite element method. That's a standard method for solving a differential equation. And the way that what we're doing here is, in essence, taking the finite element method, but instead of trying to solve for the equation, we look at it from a different point of view and say, what happens if we substitute in the data that we have and then try to estimate the parameters? So it's sort of the reverse of what you would normally think of with a finite element method. So that's the core. Everything follows from that concept. And that was originally proposed in 54. And basically no one was working in this area by the end of the century. And so this is what we've sort of unearthed here. Okay, so briefly here, so Dan is who's a graduate student with me, and a lot of this work originated from what was in his dissertation, and so he's sort of been a collaborator from day one on this direction here, and then the research that we're doing. And then of course we have April as another graduate student in the group, and then Nora and Rainey are two postdocs. Vanya is another faculty member in the department who does computational statistics, who's been heavily involved in this also since day one. And then Seth and Nick and Moyi are, so Seth and Nick are new graduate students and Moyi is a new postdoc, but these are people that are sort of co-advising and working with other people on. And then by the way, all of the codes and everything that we produce the results in here, if you're interested, it's in the MathBio CU direct on GitHub, the project there, though it's kind of gone far beyond being MathBio, but that's what we have. Okay, so let's sort of dive into what we can do here and why this is compelling. So just as an example, I'm actually going to give you the punchline first here. So here's the Krumono-Sivashinsky equation. Okay, this is a well, I don't know if it's super well known, but it is an equation that occurs in like laminar flame fronts. There's applications in plasma physics, but it is a particularly challenging one to deal with, of course, because you can immediately see you've got 4 derivatives. You've got a nonlinearity here. It's challenging. And so if, just as an example, if you took this system and this was the data you had, how in the world are you going to be identifying these parameters? To make things worse, you can actually prove that this is spatiotemporal chaos. So any slight numerical problems way over here at time 0 are going to cause you big problems by the time you get to over on the right side, right? It's gonna blow up on you. And you really want to identify these parameters, -1, -1, -1, right? How do you do that for these complicated problems if you have data like this? Well, normally we think about fitting solutions to data. You can do some filtering things, but at the end of the day, you're still worried about matching the solution to data. Of course, you have to worry about your numerical discretization. There's a knob you have to turn. Maybe you could train a pin to do that very fast and do operator learning. Maybe you want to, and generally in the 50s and 60s, they would call this minimizing the output error. And now we just think about this as matching, the solution for whatever W you've come up with as a parameter, matching that to the data, capital U. There are natural questions, right? Do you have the correct model? What if something changed? There are a whole laundry list of an entire sub area of statistics is ways that you can do to detect that it's the correct model, from just statistical testing to Kublik-Leibler discrepancies and the entire information criteria world that came out of that. There's the Bayesian world. There's more of the computer science world. So there's a lot of different ways that you can say how good does the information flow from data to parameters. And usually the methods that people have come up with, you worry about robustness to noise. How accurate is it? What is the computational efficiency? How fast can this be done? And usually any method you come up with, pick two, right? You don't get all three. And so one of the things that's been fascinating about this is that there are ways in which we're getting all three of these. And here's what the example I'm going to show. So with that Kermoto-Sivashinsky equation, here along this axis is the wall time to do a parameter estimation. Here along the vertical axis is the relative error of the vector, so the norm of the error, basically. And this is with 20% noise on a spatiotemporal chaotic PDE. And if you just try to do this in MATLAB, depending upon the real noise realization, depending upon the parameter initial guess you have, which of course then you have to figure out what your initial guess is, you can get anything between taking a second if you're lucky, all the way to hundreds of seconds, all the way from basically 1% or so, or to 10% error, going or single digits error, all the way up to hundreds and hundreds of percents error. So there's really this entire spread of different output error methods that just using standard PDE solver in MATLAB to try to solve these. There's a lot of knobs. Your numerical optimization. When do you stop? When do you iterate, and what do you truncate? Or sorry, when do you converge? Turns out if you use what we're doing in the weak form, you get a very straightforward linear algebra problem that is taking less than a second on a laptop, and you're getting, the mean here is really for 20% noise, you're getting far down here below 10% error on these parameters, which is quite surprising that you're able to get both the speed, the accuracy, and the robustness to the 20% noise here. Okay, so hopefully this has whet your appetite now, and that there's a lot of interesting things that are coming, and you'll let me get away with my cutesy title about the weak form being stronger than you think. But okay, so where does our story begin? Let's go back to the 50s, and I'll show you what what they were doing. So they would say, okay, I have some differential equation here. In this case, there was ODEs, time derivative over here, and then we have linear and parameters. These functions here usually are coming from the equations of motion, various physics-based ideas. The whole concept that they were attempting to do, and then it sort of stopped working on this area, was instead of solving the equation, let's take the equation and plug the data in. And so you can, of course, create for every data point you sample at U1 all the way to UM. You can evaluate it at all these features, these FKs that you have that are physics-based. And then you can evaluate a vector, which is the derivatives. Now, of course, you see I put a little tilde here because we know if we start taking derivatives of data, especially if it's noisy, that's going to be a problem. And they knew this too, right? So they said, all right, so here's the GW minus B. Let's try to identify the parameters in a least squares sense. That's great if it's not noisy because it's fast, but it's very sensitive to noise, especially if you do finite difference approximations here. And even if you do smoothing, because the problem is that you're basically projecting your data not onto the solution manifold, you're projecting onto the basis for the smoothing operators. You can still get, there's well-known biases that will creep in here, which can be a problem if you're trying to fly your plane. Okay. So as I said, advances in output error methods really, this area did not receive as much development as it could have. And by the year 2000, it was pretty much dormant. So that's where we were for quite a while. And then there was a paper in 2016 in PNAS that is the Cindy method, right? The sparse identification of nonlinear dynamics. And why this has sort of resurrected this area of, the equation error, looking at the actual, when you plug in the data into the equation, this equation error approach, is what Steve Brunt and Josh Proctor and Nathan Kutz did, was they said, okay, Suppose we don't know the right-hand side. Suppose we say, let's consider a kitchen sink. Let's consider all these possible libraries, a huge set of library terms here. And can we, by plugging the data in to this particular matrix here, can we do, again, a minimization of the least squares, but to look at the, well, let's regularize it by doing sparsity. Okay, so the idea would be if you plug the data in here for, say, the diffusion equation, the W vector that you want to identify is a 0 here, a 0 here, a non-zero for this term, and then a zeros for everything else. So that's the sparsification process that you want to do. Okay, so this actually it's really resurrected this area of equation error. You can call it an operator learning algorithm if you wish. It's not quite the same as what we think of with neural networks, but you are literally learning the right-hand side of an evolution operation. So it is kind of an operator learning. You're just getting, the pencil and paper version of it that you could then analyze if you wanted to. Now, of course, the problem with the derivatives didn't go away. That's still there. If you're doing any type of finite difference approximation, it's very easy to see that the step size in the denominator is going to, destroy the variance of this estimator. If you just make the assumption that you have data plus noise and you try to do a finite difference approximation on it, it's just your expected value of this is just going to blow up awfully. So, moreover, what about, independent of the noise? What if you have a shock wave? And you have data being taken on that? Well, your solution may not be smooth, so immediately we start thinking about the weak form. And so what happened was one of the things that when we were being very frustrated, and I was being very frustrated at looking at some of these, model selection methods and parameter inference methods, and if there was anything we could do that would be better, it occurred to me maybe we could do something with an integral transform of this. And then sort of Dan said, how about the weak form? And this is really where this came from. And so if we look at this, okay, so this is a more abstract version, right? So here's your using multi-index notation. So there's just think about this as the time derivative on the left, and this is whatever derivatives you need. And then these are potentially nonlinear terms. So that's the form. At least that's what I'm going to restrict to right now. We don't really have to be that restrictive, but let's just deal with this because it's easier to work through. So the idea here is you take your PDE, and of course you interpret it in the weak sense. So you need a test function, right? Now, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it because we can pull the derivatives off of the data and just by integration by parts, place it on the test function. We, of course, choose test functions that are compactly supported over a finite region. So you have, 0 values, and then you set it up with 0 derivatives at the endpoints, and you don't have to worry about the evaluation part of integration by parts, and you're just pulling derivatives off of the data itself. We get around that whole problem with the discretization and the finite difference operators causing problems with noisy data, and this equation is the equation. So we're actually now trying to solve for these parameters with a simply transformed equation. Now, so what does this sort of look like? You can, of course, then create your B vector, your G matrix, and again, you're back in the sparse regression problem, but now you're robust to noise. And that's really the core of what's happened here. Okay. Are there any quick questions so far before? Because this is sort of the core of what I'm going to build on.
Yeah, any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, Professor. I have a quick question.
Yes.
Could you please explain how noise affects, how the derivatives get affected in the presence of noise? I didn't understand that part quite well.
So if you so here's on this side, well, there's a time derivative here. There's also first, second space derivatives, or however many derivatives you want as potential library terms that you could select for. So just as I mentioned, so if it's diffusion, you only want this one, right? You want to do the sparse regression, so you get that. But the problem is you have data, which is the U, right? This capital U is your data. What happens when you plug the data into the equation? We're not solving the equation. We're completely bypassing that idea. We are simply taking an original equation. In this case, we're making it a super large because it's got all these potential terms in there, but you still have to plug the data in to be able to minimize this least squares cost function. So it's a residual of the equation itself. And so the problem is, how do you do that if you have noisy data. Is that
Awesome.
answering your question?
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
And there's another question by Amit in the chat.
Okay.
He's asking, will this work if you have first and second time derivatives?
Yes, I mean, so we have gone all the way up to, I mean, fourth derivatives are no problem. I'll actually show a plot later on where we nailed the fourth derivative really accurately.
Okay.
Yeah, it's limited by the library you choose. So whatever library you decide you need here, that's it. And we've done things all the way up to hundreds and even 1,000 terms in the library. If you go too big, like if you decide, oh, well, I want to have u to the 10th power as a potential term in the library, you can run into numerical problems where vectors that are sort of super large dominate everything, and so you have rank problems. But you know, then there's a question of, do you really need u to the 10th as a library you want to reject? Or library term you want to reject? Usually you just talk to the physicist or the biochemist or whoever you're dealing with as far as what's a reasonable set, and maybe go one above that. You know, it's sort of a little more ad hoc, but it's still, you just try not to get too big for numerical reasons. Okay. All right. Okay, so, right. So again, we're back to solving this sparse regression problem. Okay. So what do these things look like? Well, they're just test functions. They're just test functions that are 0 at the endpoints, and derivatives are 0 at the endpoints. And then, of course, you can take a derivative of the test function instead of taking a derivative of the data. And you can kind of squint at this. This is just you know, phi and phi prime here, and you can see this is actually like almost a continuous analog of a finite difference operator. I mean, it's a negative of it, right? But that's really what this is doing here. Is that integral transform is it's not just smoothing the data like this type of a kernel would be, but it's also a derivative smoother when after integration by parts. So of course, there's all these questions that come up, which are at the end of the day, and this is the important part. These are answerable questions using very conventional things in numerical analysis, numerical linear algebra, statistics that have come out in the last 70 years. You know, what's the spectrum of these? You know, these types of analyses. So there's like, this is something that is understandable from one end to the other. Is sort of my point here. If you want to see the sort of a brief sort of high-level overview, we got an article on the front page of SciEm News in October. It's some nice, pretty pictures there. But so that's the bigger picture here. But at the end of the day, this you know, it has been around for a while, and I went over it a little bit in the SciEm News, mentioned the 54 articles, but it's, you know, people didn't stop in 54. Like, they continued developing this. There's actually a companion sort of archive preprint that goes through a lot of the more citations in the history of this. And what people had come up with was everything from trig functions to various piecewise polynomials. This is the one that completely independently, we didn't know about this when we started, but this is the one we came up with also. And then a variety of other people using Hermite polynomials. There's 3 different frequencies of trig functions, and then there's something down here with CAS as cosine plus sine, and then this is basically using a Hartley transform. So there's a variety of things people have chosen to try, but we have some other ideas. So yeah, so there's a history here, but it was really dormant by 2000. And in the archive preprint, that's the companion for the SciEm News, I go into this sort of what's happening here. Okay. So let's see. So what is possible now with this method? Well, the Lorentz equation. This is sort of everyone's favorite chaotic attractor here. Add 10% noise to this, and you get the red fuzzy bits here. And we can get less than 1% error with 10% noise on this, and do it in, I mean, fractions and fractions of a second. I mean, why? Because it's going completely to the realm of linear algebra, numerical linear algebra. MATLAB is amazing at this, right? And I'm just doing this in MATLAB. There's nothing super fancy about this that's going on. But the question is, you know, when you think about model discovery for, say, the Lorentz equation, how in the world can you even compare? I mean, I'm able to solve this threshold, or prune the incorrect terms from like 100 or several hundred term library, get the correct Lorentz equation, get the parameters with less than 1% error in a fraction of a second. Whereas if I tried to just fit this using a standard system AD toolbox, I must admit, I actually did let MATLAB run this, and it ran for like a week trying to fit and solve and fit and estimate, and it never figured out what the parameters were with 10% noise for this amount of, it took forever. So that's great. So we have the whole paper in multi-scale modeling and simulation. I did this on ODEs and then PDEs. We have a computational physics paper, and this works exactly. Not only the noise is dealt with, but also the shock waves are dealt with. And this is just burgers, right? Or this is burgers. And for several hundred of these carpet pictures, we can go all the way up to 99%. Sorry, what is it? 100% error. So that's basically the noise to signal ratio. And you can end up with 99% of those hundreds of experiments. We correctly get that there is only this term. Okay, sure, it's not perfect, 2.5%. So it's not exactly of all those hundreds of experiments, it's not always exactly -1, but the worst is 2.5% off, which is pretty nice. Of course, Kermode-Shevchinski, same thing. And this is now the equation discovery. What I was talking about was the parameter estimation. If we assume we know these three terms are here, and what's happening now is we go all the way up to 100% error, and 96% of the equation, of the experiments, we correctly determine just these three terms. 30% error on the parameters, but at that point, it's sort of, you're pretty happy that you've gotten the three terms you want. So, and that's the max overall, the runs we did. Okay, so where's the magic come from? Like that's it's interesting that you can just take data and come up with an equation even if it's noisy. And if you look at the Journal of Computational Physics, we have other examples, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But like Navier-Stokes, reaction diffusions, these are all well within the framework that we can deal with. So where does this come from? And here's something that was really fascinating. I'll talk a little bit about this later also. And this was what we realized in the MMS paper. So this is just a van der Pol oscillator, so a standard nonlinear oscillator here. If you look at a test function that's a piecewise polynomial, so you've got roots at a and minus a, and then you have, it's sort of a compactly supported. So outside of whatever so you have your middle of the test function, and then outside of a or minus a, every place else, that's all 0. And then we use that, kind of just shift the test function throughout the domain to create our equations. But you still have to choose this p, right, as the power of the polynomial. One of the fascinating things we realized was for the no noise case, if you crank up the p, you actually get the accuracy of your ODE solver. Like if you could do better than this, will keep going down. And we've tried this with higher precision things. And basically where this is coming from is the fact that you need to do these inner products, right? So these are approximations of integrals. Of course, they're discrete approximations of integrals. But here's the thing. We were just using the trapezoid rule. Now, the trapezoid rule has a superpower, right? It's a superpower that if you have a periodic function, and it turns into periodic with you do the periodic extension, you have basically something that's ordered delta t to the p+1 power is the error in doing this regression here. So this residual for the left side, minus the right side, basically, you get order t, delta t to the p+1. So if you keep cranking up the order on the polynomial of your piecewise polynomial for your test function, you will get better and better results because your numerical error is going down in the no noise case, right? So this is not something I'd seen before in terms of parameter estimation or equation discovery. This is sort of, basically gave us an indication that maybe we were onto something interesting. And so what you can actually do, and we did this a little bit later, you can take that residual, which is of course, GW minus R. Oops, that should be B, not R. Sorry, GW minus B. So that's the residual. But of course, you can plug in the data, and for an arbitrary vector parameters, what happens when you take truth plus noise? Well, here's the interesting part. This is something, just some Taylor expansions, etc. You can break this down into the part of the residual is due to the noise. So if noise goes away, of course, then this term disappears. The part of the residual due to having the W not be correct. So of course, if you plug in the correct W, then this is going to go away. But then there's this other term having to do with the numerical discretization. Okay, and so what happened is it's actually the numerical discretization that is driving, or that's dominating in this case. Of course, if you get enough noise, then this term dominates. And then, of course, if you're far enough away from the true solution, then that term dominates. But it was really interesting that this was This is a numerical analysis question at this point. And so given the data, we came up with a basically a Fourier transform, a discrete Fourier transform way to approximate what the derivative, or what the error in the integral is. And the two black lines are kind of like, you can bound where the numerical error is. And then what this is also showing is that as you increase, sorry, the horizontal axis here is the radius of a test function. The vertical axis is the error in the, whatchamacallit, the error in the parameter estimate. And so you can see that the numerical is the upper bound of the black line, the lower bound of the numerics on that integration error. And then as you add noise, of course, the floor gets brought up. So green is a little bit of noise, red is more noise, blue is a lot of noise. But the important thing is what you can do is you can choose a test function now which is a transition, and it's away from the numerical error into the noise. So you don't have to worry about this term here, or you can minimize the impact of that term. And that's, you know, that's what we've discovered, this balance between noise and numerics. Okay. So another thing that has been really interesting here is you can also look at this if you have something with lots of spectrum frequency. You don't just look at like a local test function. You can actually look at a global perspective that am I matching the spectrum correctly? So if I have blue as the truth for Kermode-Sivashinsky, noise is red is my noisy data that's added on top of that. If I look at the Fourier transform of the data, I can figure out, you know, try to figure out a region where the noise is starting to, I want to get rid of the noise above a certain level. And if I use that to pick my wave number, and I can then translate that back into a choice of a test function, and the shape of the test function, how fast it's decaying. What you see down here is basically the fourth derivative of data. So the red is, of course, the blue is, of course, the true weak fourth derivative. And then the red is the noisy fourth derivative, the weak fourth derivative of noisy data. And you can see, I mean, you can just, they're lying on top of each other, right? So they're not perfect, but it's, that's the reason that term is not a problem, taking a fourth derivative of noisy data. Okay. One of the other things that has been incredibly helpful is, and this is one of the reasons I think why, if you naively plow ahead with this method without thinking about computational concerns, you'll get the wrong answer. So if you have 50% noise on KDV, so this is a Korteweg de Vries with some solitons that are interacting with each other. The issue is, if you look at it, you've got, you know, the time axis is on the order of 10 to the minus 3, the space axis is order 1, and the value of the solution is order 3. That's 6 orders of magnitude separating the numbers in each of these cases. If you just plow ahead and form G without thinking, you're going to get a condition number on the order of 10 to the 26. That's going to be challenging for, you know, IEEE double precision floating point arithmetic. However, if you rescale these so that they are sort of all on the same scale, you can actually drop your condition number to 10 to the 6th, which is not perfect, but it's much better than, it's basically matching your you know, 10 to the minus 3 to the 10 to the 3 separation, as opposed to something that's just, you know, off the chart awful and won't actually tell you anything. So scaling is important to make sure you normalize things. So what's the punchline here? Well, so we went through and chose a laundry list of very challenging PDEs, gave them some reasonable libraries with, you know, a certain number of non-zero terms: immiscid Burgers, Kermode-Sivashinsky, KDV, nonlinear Schrodinger, Navier-Stokes, porous media, Sine-Gordon, reaction diffusion. So all things that exhibit different kinds of shock waves, stiff systems, spirals, you know, oscillatory behavior, chaos, you know, these kind of things. Nothing takes more than 75 seconds on a nice old creaky laptop from over 10 years ago. So in some sense, it really makes sense, right? Because it's just a linear regression problem. You're just solving AX equals B. It ends up, you know, it's not the small system. You do have to worry about, you know, G is 11,000 by 181 in a reaction diffusion system, but it still is, to be able to correctly learn that that is a reaction diffusion spiral wave system in 75 seconds seems very interesting, and a compelling result that, if you have data like that, would be something to consider, you know, using this method on to see what comes out of it. So, okay, so that's all in the Journal of Computational Physics article. and again, sort of what in the world do you mean by comparison? Like if you're trying to do like some AIC type comparison, you have to propose all different combinations of methods and solve those PDEs. Like this is a completely different way to think about model discovery. Okay, so what becomes possible? So here's something that is really kind of interesting. We chose to look at, of all things, cell migration. And there are actually some really interesting directions you can go with this in terms of, well, like even birds and drones. If you're trying to discover something about how drones are, what rules drones are using to fly and which directions they're going, this is actually a framework that you can start thinking about it. So we chose cell migration because I have a project with someone who traces, basically they take a sheet of skin cells and then they cut away part of it and watch the cells to migrate into the wound. And so usually there are PDE models that describe these in terms of chemotaxis and other types of just traditional PDE modeling. What we did was a cell-by-cell model. So this is interacting particle system. So you have, what are the rules that the cell is using? This is an attraction repulsion force potential, there's an alignment potential, and there's a drag potential. Now, we haven't gone further than saying what is the functional form of this, this function here, but that's sort of pushing the phenomenology question one layer further away from you, that then you could go to now the biochemistry and say, you know, if I come up with this shape of a potential for a cell in terms of what it's using to sense its environment and choose where it goes, you immediately have a more concrete conversation with a biochemist that talks about this. So what do these things look like? Well, to be completely fair, there's a lot of artificial data here. We started with experimental data, but there was some, you know, these potentials are inspired by experimental data. We've just gotten some new data sets that we're going to be trying. But the idea here, what we're going to use, which again was inspired by now analyzing real data, this is a attraction repulsion potential, which is basically saying the cell doesn't not want to get too close or in front of or behind the cells that are moving. They can hang out next to each other in like a row. That's okay, and kind of march forward in a row. That's a perfectly fine movement. Over here, it's saying that whatever the cell is in front of it, I want to align with that. So if I see a cell going like this one back here is going to try to follow it as it moves in whichever direction it's moving. It could care less about what's going on behind it. So given that these were inspired by, you know, the first pass of data, what we did was then we created a bunch of artificial cells. And here's the thing that's really fascinating. So we made a heterogeneous mixture of cells that had different potentials, and we let them, you know, run around. That's all the gray trajectories here. So we assumed we had gray trajectories. Then for each individual cell, we learned the potentials for that cell, and then given for each cell, so there was hundreds and hundreds of cells, and then each of them had their own potentials, we were able to use a ad hoc classification scheme and recover the fact that we had actually put 3 different cell lines or 3 different cell types based on their potential behaviors in that mixture. This is just one, I don't think this is all, but this is a certain, one of the cell types is the teal one. And what you can see here is that as the cell moves along, on the black is the data, we can learn those potentials correctly, that if you, it's literally lying right on top of it. And it includes the ability to do, I mean, this is the 90-degree turn followed by a 180-degree turn based upon the nearby cells. And you can see we're pretty much nailing these data correctly. So we're excited about some of the new data that we're getting to analyze from the lab. But this is the kind of thing that can happen, is now you can say, all right, put down a bunch of cells, have them grow, and now I can literally, based on their trajectories, I can discover what is the subpopulations, which is kind of, the biologists were pretty excited about this. And just to show you what it looks like, so here's this is sort of the subsets of the gray trajectories here of all the cells. And we have, you know, based upon how well that trajectory predicts which way something's going, you can actually, you know, it's a normally distributed error. You can actually separate and say, okay, if I use the wrong model, they're over here, and here's all the right model matched to the cells. And so they can literally be split into subpopulations that are of different cell types. So let's see. Yeah, so this was 3 cells. One of the things that's interesting here is that these were completely unlabeled trajectories. So we didn't go in saying, oh, I know that this is from this cell type. They were completely no knowledge about them, aside from they were coming from an interacting particle system. Okay. The whole idea here is we're trying to build a framework that would be foundational tools for biological digital twins, right? I mean, the next step in the funding that we have, what we're doing is with these trajectories, we're also then my collaborator can label certain pathways inside the cell. So now you're going to be able to learn an ODE for each individual cell that describes the biochemistry, as well as the interacting particle system, so how it is choosing which way to go. And so you're now coupling biochemistry with mechanical taxis and movement. Okay. All right, so that's one application. Another application, as I kind of showed a little bit of this in the beginning, is parameter estimation. And so why this is different? Well, so here's the thing. If we have the basically matrix G, which has data in it, times the vector W parameters we want, and we have the vector B, which has also data in it, this is, yeah, you can just solve the normal equations, right? This is what we learn in linear algebra. Very, very simple and straightforward. The problem here is this is not a traditional ordinary least squares problem. You have to think about this, and you have to be very careful because you have your data is corrupting the matrix and the vector. And the picture that shows you this is this. Normally we think about, if you just run a straight line through something, you have vertical errors, right? That would be like errors just in B. The problem here is that we have both errors in the horizontal and the vertical direction. If you know something about the ratio of errors in the different terms, then you can call it a total least squares problem. And this is a very well-known and well-studied, Gene Golub has a bunch of papers on this, the total least squares numerics. But that's a different issue. So the way that we came up to do this is effectively, if you look at the residual of your truth here, it's actually normally distributed, but you need to know the parameters to get the covariance. So we have an iterative updating scheme, just reweighting the covariance. It's sort of our first pass at this. Creates a matrix here. The important thing is that when you do this, you have to do a Taylor expansion to get this. What you need in here is a Jacobian of your library. Okay, so all these other things, this is just bookkeeping. If you have different dimensions of variables, et cetera, here's your test functions, choices. The important thing is buried down in there. You actually need to know the derivatives of your library terms, and then you can get an accurate estimate for the parameters and the covariance that comes along with that. So just an example here, this is Pichi-Nagumo. So this is just a standard oscillation ODE from neuroscience. If you do traditional nonlinear least squares where you do forward solves, guess a parameter, solve, check, guess a parameter, solve, that kind of thing, you're over here because you have so many knobs that you need to turn. The tolerance of the solver, the stopping criteria for the optimization, all these things. And it can take hundreds of seconds just for a simple ODE with 5% noise. Whereas, the difference between in time, and this is horizontal axis is time, vertical axis is error again, the difference in this time and this time is probably did you hit reload on your email and check it, right? Because that's what you can do, and you're talking about seconds or fractions of a second depending on how you code it up. And of course, yeah, there is a difference in the specific errors you get out, but that's realization based, right? It's the specific noisy data that you have and where was it noisy. Okay. One of the really awesome parts about this is that since you are living back in statistics and regression world, you get sort of your UQ on the parameters for free, right? Because it's just what's inference on the parameters. You can get obviously this is sort of a scaled covariance matrix, but you can say what's the relationship between the various parameters. That's all part of traditional statistics. Okay. So one more application here, which is what is part of the MIMIC, the Department of Energy proposal, this center that that Young-Soo and I are a part of. And here's two examples from that. Because now when you have this idea of sparse regression, maybe you have an equation and the Hamiltonian and all these things, but at the end of the day, what if it's so complicated that you can't do anything with it? So what we've been looking at here is reduced order models. And so what you see on the left is a reduced order model where the Hamiltonian is being maintained, basically. So you're taking some higher dimensional system and you're collapsing it. In this case, I think it was a nonlinear coupled oscillators in 8 dimensions. This was collapsed to 4. So you're only seeing 3 of the variables, but there's actually a 4th one. But what's really nice is by doing that process, there's still some knobs you can choose which scale you want to look at while keeping your Hamiltonian more or less accurate. So the basically the original curve is this black line, which is bumping around in this phase space. And you can see there's sort of oscillations and a scale that's going into and out of the screen. And then there's a larger scale oscillation going around this orbit. You can choose your scale such that you either are stuck here and you can just be on the fast scale, oscillating here, or you can choose the longer time scale to go around the orbit where you've collapsed in that direction. And this was published this summer. The other place you can do reduced order model is a much more computational thing that is what came out of Young Su's group with this latent space dynamics inference or identification. And so this case is where, say, you want to train your model. So these are two parameters related to the initial condition for solving, I think this is 1D or 2D burgers. And you can train your, basically your compression, your autoencoder if you want, or a pod, whatever you want, train it on the black squares, which are parameter combinations. But the question is, can you create a reduced order model where you can pick a different arbitrary parameter in this grid or elsewhere and get a correct reduced order model that then you can expand back to the full order model. But you're doing all your solving on the reduced order model. And so here's the thing, is that the original way of dealing with LOSD, this latent space dynamics identification, was to use, well, basically ordinary least squares combined with finite difference operators from the sort of plain vanilla SINDY. If you use the weak form SINDY, it turns out that you can get it down to the resolution of your projection operation. And these are, you can't really see the numbers here, sorry. They're like 3 and 4%, which is basically as good as it's going to get based upon the autoencoder or the pod projection of using only so many singular values. And so, of course, even, and here's the thing, 50% noise on the original data, you get down to a model that's giving you 100% speed up and only 5% error in your predictions. So it's really quite compelling in terms of how it can help. Okay, let's see. So I want to make sure I get one little thing in here. The really awesome part about this is actually something that has really been quite interesting for us, and just we can actually say what's the class of models that in the limited continuum data, we are basically with probability 1 asymptotically, we will recover the correct model. And so you have asymptotic consistency in the model learning process. So if you have a model which is this form right here, so linear and bilinear, the highest power it can be is quadratic and an individual variable. And this is a huge number of different, all the equations I've shown today all fall in this category. If you try to learn it and you learn the wrong model, add more data. Asymptotically, you will be able to get it. And we have some results that say exactly what that looks like. So at the end, so there's like a critical noise level, stability tolerance. So this is all I don't want to go too long here, but we have a very nice theorem that is coming out in IMA numerical analysis. That Dan did some amazing work with the concentrations of the probability here. And basically, here's a picture of what it looks like. This isn't Karamoto-Sivashinsky. It's kind of close, though, and it's got things like 6 derivatives, so it's sort of the same ilk. This is the picture of the solution where x and then time goes up, and you can see it very quickly gets all sorts of messy and chaotic. This is kind of what a test function looks like. And so we're kind of taking that, that smudging magnifying glass and kind of passing it through the domain to create our large linear system to solve. And this is, of course, what the noisy version looks like. As you more or less go from left to right here, you're adding more and more data, a higher resolution of data in here. You're sort of decreasing the step sizes in T and X. And what you can see is that for the highest level noise, so noise ratio 1, so 100%, you can't do it on a test function that is, the data is 13 by 13, that's too small. But by the time you get over to 100 by 100, you're really starting to recover, the probability of you recovering this model completely correct in the terms is approaching 1, okay? And so, of course, for less noise, then it's easier to recover the correct model. And then so we have this, and this is surprisingly, a huge fraction of mathematical physics fits in this category. So we can discover many things. We even have some corollaries to this, where if you add extra terms like trig functions, you'll still get the correct recovery. It's just going to be biased as the parameters, but you'll still have the correct terms. Okay. Okay, then in the last few minutes here, I want to talk about forthcoming work. So this is what I showed at the beginning. We've got parameter estimation and PDEs. That's sort of in progress. There's another angle on this that's also in progress, but really fascinating, because there's one kind of big landmine sitting in the middle of this that is an important feature that needs to be addressed. And it's that you need to have data on all of the variables that are going to go into this equation error. Okay, so just as an example, if you wanted to estimate parameters or learn equations for a epidemiology model, right? You don't get to know the number of people who are susceptible every day during a pandemic. You don't get to know the number of people who are infected and asymptomatic. Maybe you have some guesses in terms of the data, but you don't have a really good. What you do have are hospitalizations. You have really good data on people every day. You can get a census. The Departments of Public Health would have that. And so the question is, how do you use these methods? And I mean, here's another example where you're giving somebody some therapy in the blood. You can measure the blood and see how well it's working, but you can't sample somebody's liver or other organs to see if the drug's getting in there. But you can write down a differential equation model, and then I can take samples on the blood, and what you do is use some tricks from differential algebra to reduce this to an equation just in the observed variable, and then you can do things. And so this is just a plot showing, actually, if you have the noise increasing in your blood samples, you can still get pretty good estimates of the parameters of K12, K21, and this sort of uptake numbers. So this sort of work in progress. We're trying to basically solve that problem using some nifty differential algebra tricks. Okay, so time summary. So I think about this more broadly speaking as operator learning. We are learning the form of the equation, and that is our W-Cindy algorithm that does that. Parameter inference is, we're calling it Wendy, weak form estimation of nonlinear dynamics, and we are really excited because we are actually getting a lot of these race properties of robustness, accuracy, and the computational efficiency. And most important, so there's two things: the computational efficiency. You can run these things on laptops, so this is really fast. If you choose to do this on a GPU, you can actually recast a step in the middle as a one layer in a convolutional neural network, and you can actually get another order of magnitude speed up simply because of the embarrassingly parallel feature of doing that. And so actually even running it on a GPU goes even faster, not because you're using some network or anything, just because of the mathematics of GPUs and the way they work with the cores. One of the things I'll mention before the end here, there has been a nice ecosystem that has started to develop around this. There's sort of become an awareness that the weak form is really, this has some compelling noise robustness results. And so even in the group at the University of Washington, they have come up with an alternative strategy, which is called ensembling, that helps with the noise. But it turned out it was fascinating. If you did the weak form, the ensembling, that was actually the best of all their methods in their paper. There's even some people at MIT doing mixed integer optimization. There's ways to improve the sparse regression. Sunha Kang at Georgia Tech is leading a group that's doing some of that. There's even some really nice theoretical results, basically casting this in a reproducing kernel Hilbert space. And the W-Cindy algorithm is sort of projecting in a way that is accurate, et cetera. And then one final thing I'll mention, which I thought was really, really fascinating, this is a paper I just saw. There's a group in California at the basically City of Hope, I think is the research center down in Southern California. And they were taking dynamic MRI images and recovering spatially varying perfusion coefficients. That may not be confusing as why is that interesting? Well, basically, if you give somebody some sort of a tracer or a contrast and watch it perfuse through, say, a tumor, those are going to have different perfusion parameters than the surrounding tissue. And so you're very quickly able from dynamic MRI images to reconstruct exactly where a tumor might be. And so this is a really interesting application. They're using our method to do this. I was just kind of blown away when I saw some of the results. Okay, so acknowledgements here. Of course, there've been nice support from a variety of funding agencies. And then these are, of course, as we all know, these are the people who did the real work, the graduate students. And I must need to call out Dan, because that's really the work came out of his dissertation, and we've been collaborating ever since on this. He's now a director's postdoc fellow at LANL. And then just the references that we have here. So if you want the sort of 30,000 foot view of this, there's the SIAM news article. We have a chapter in the Handbook of Numerical Analysis that goes into some more of the technical details. This is what we've managed to put out there with ODEs, PDEs, interacting particle systems, online learning, the parameter estimation, reduced order model. So sort of, it's really been quite productive for us to look at from this point of view. And then there's been some more recent proposals. Actually, this one, the fourth reduced order model paper, has been accepted. And then these are the two things that are in progress right now: nonlinear parameters, and then also estimation for the PDEs. And I think that's the talk. Thank you.
Oh, fascinating, wonderful, very nice. Thank you so much for the nice talk, David. Let's thank the speaker. Let's have a Q&A sessions. If you have questions, please unmute and ask questions. I have one question. Well, I mean, several questions, but the first question I would ask would be, that I totally agree with you, David. There will be so much more broad applications where this Wixindy can be used. I mean, you showed some biology applications and plasma and other partial differential equations or dynamics. Any other applications in mind? If you have funding, then I really want to apply this too.
Sure. Well, so we actually, so part of the NIH money is to do stochastic differential equations too. And we have a couple of, this paper right here does some stochastic differential equations. We did deterministic interacting particle systems in here. So we didn't do any of the stochastic ones. And I think this one no, not that one. This one here is an ecology example, which does have some stochastics in it as well.
And the reason why you want to go there, like the stochastic?
Well, so if you think about doing parameter estimation for stochastic differential equations, a lot of the time you need to do a large number of realizations of the solutions to sample it. And when you are, if you have data either for like an individual particle and is wandering around, we can do some estimation there. Or if you have a collection of particles, that I didn't have it in this talk, but we've actually done some things with having like a couple hundred particles wandering around, and you can very quickly identify the drift and diffusion coefficients. I mean, some of the preliminary versions of this go all the way back to the first weak form papers from 2019, 2021, that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that's an area that's really compelling, because it's sort of this automatic upscaling is what you're kind of doing to get the parameters you need. Is that answering your question?
Yeah. Can it be somehow useful for the noise data as well? The stochastic differential equation?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a question of what's swamping what, right? And what's the dominant? How much do you know? Like, is it just Brownian motion, and then your observation is noisy also? That's something you would have to do some analysis to turn the crank on it. The nice part about it, though, is that you're again dealing with a statistical regression system. So there's nonlinear regression you can do things with. There's linear regression. There's these errors and variables problems. So there's a lot of it's a well-trod path that simply I feel like a lot of the times we go look up some advanced things in the literature, and then not that the theorems and the papers write themselves, but they are available to be discovered. And it's less. It's just it's what you're trained for when you do applied math, basically.
All right. We have a hands up
Okay.
by Amit. Amit, if you can, yeah, ask a question.
Thanks, Yangsu. Thanks, David. Very nice talk. I think one particular application is what we are trying to do in our group. We are in the physics division. We are trying to generate continuum scale models directly from atomistic data. And the hope is that complexity associated with the non-equilibrium processes, effect of chemistry, all of these can be incorporated into the continuum scale models that we hope to learn from atomistic data. And I think naturally they come out to be stochastic differential equations. So not we initially we thought they'll just be PDEs, but it seems now that they'll be SDEs. And the question or the couple of questions that come up are the following. And one of them I actually had mentioned: what happens if you have higher order time derivatives present in your dictionary? And the second thing is that, you showed a lot of examples, but I wonder if you can comment on the ability to learn a non-local terms. I mean, differential equations that have an integral operator with a non-local kernel. And how would noise in the input data affect the ability to reliably learn such non-local terms?
Okay. I don't have a direct answer for you in terms of the non-local. I know we have done non-local terms in this paper here. We did sort of local and non-local learning of the terms. Now we made some assumptions about what they look like, but we definitely have done that. In terms of the impact of noise, I mean, you're going to be able to compute because again, this is coming from when you burrow right down to the actual computation you end up doing. It's a regression. And so you can compute like Kramer-Rao bounds on how accurate your estimates are going to be. And in some sense, we don't really care whether or not it's local or non-local, as long as you have data to support that. So one of the things that is pretty critical, let me go back to this here. So for this particular trajectory here, like it's by itself, right? And so you don't have a lot of interactions with the nearby particles or the nearby cells there. And so this is a very challenging trajectory to learn. And so that was why our ad hoc classification scheme started with the trajectories that had a lot of information content and then said, okay, well, what if we use one of these trajectories here? Do we still get the same, or one of these models here? Do we still get the same trajectory? And so I think you're going to run into a question of, for the non-local interactions especially, do you have data that supports the existence of a non-local interaction? And sort of just for learning it. Is that sort of answering your question?
Sure. I think you are pointing to a critical issue which we are facing in a different problem, and the issue is about the diversity of the training data itself. And how do we ensure that it's uniformly distributed and is rich enough? Yeah, I think I completely understand.
Okay. Okay.
Perhaps we can have an offline discussion.
Happy to.
This is something very relevant to what we are trying to do.
Okay, great. I mean, I have seen a paper where they did some quantum hydrodynamics trying to upscale. I don't know if it was data, but it was definitely atomistic simulations. And I'm happy to follow up over email and send you that the article I know about. There's also an IPAM workshop coming up next fall that I'm helping to organize on electrochemistry. And basically trying to learn models for electrochemical interactions and such. And I can connect you with that world as well if that's of interest.
Sure, thank you.
Awesome, cool. Any other questions? I mean, it's 5 after 11, but if you have questions, I'm sure David is happy to stay longer. No? All right. If not, let's thank our speaker, David, and for the wonderful talk. And I'm sure if you have further questions, we'll be happy to get an email from you guys.
Yeah, please follow up. Happy to chat about any of the applications or the methods and such.
And also David welcomes, future collaboration with you guys as well. So please contact David. Well, with that, let me start the record button.